मनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं. Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our Bhagavad Gita, to Bhakti Shastri course, where we are now discussing Nectar of Devotion. So, in the Nectar of Devotion, there are just like an ocean can have different sections: the eastern section, western section, northern, southern section. So, Rupa Goswami here envisions the Bhakti Rasa Amrit Sindhu, the ocean of devotion, as having different sections. So we discussed briefly about the eastern section, and what he does is every chapter in this ocean or different parts of the Bhakti Rasa Amrit Sindhu are like waves in a section. So let's look backwards to have an overview of the Bhakti Rasa Amrit Sindhu. So we are now continuing with the introduction today. So we discussed the eastern side of the ocean, the varieties of Bhakti. Prabhupada translates it as. It has overview of devotion, devotional service and practice, and ecstasy, and love of God. Then southern side has these different emotions: Vibhav, Anubhav, Sattvic Bhav, Abhichari Bhav, and Sthayi Bhav. We won't be going into a detailed discussion of these, but we'll discuss them at an appropriate time briefly. Then there is the five rasas. So in the western side, the five rasas are Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. So Rupa Goswami gives examples of these rasas and he explains those rasas systematically. And in the northern side, he talks about the secondary rasas. So we know there are 12 mellows. So out of 12 rasas, there are 5 are primary, and the secondary are Hasya, Ashcharya, Virya, Krodha, Bhayanaka, Bhaya, and Karunya. So Karunya is fourth here. And then he talks about Rasabhas and Vikara of Rasas, incompatible and distorted mellows. So this is an overview of the structure of the Bhakti Rasa Amrit Sindhu. Now let's understand the concept of rasa a little bit more. There are two approaches to understanding the absolute truth. One is the analytical and the other is the aesthetic. So to understand it simply, one can look at a flower. Now if you look at a flower, if I analyze a flower as a botanist, then I will see, okay, a flower has a stamen, it has a carpel, it has androecium, it has gynoecium. So I can go into a botanical analysis of the various parts of a flower. Now this analysis is valid in its own way, but it will not lead me to appreciate the beauty of the flower. When an artist sees a flower, the artist does not see the androecium, the gynoecium. What the artist sees is, oh, how beautiful is the flower. Sees the shape, the texture, the fragrance, the alignment of all the petals and the arrangement of the whorl. So the aesthetic vision is more suited for appreciation of beauty. Similarly, the absolute truth can be seen as an analytical object. And when it is seen as an analytical object, then there is dhimahi, meditate. So this often leads to an impersonal sort of conception where one does not relish the absolute truth. So the Srimad Bhagavatam starts with this conception and it talks about it. The first verse, Janmadhyasyatah, it ends with dhimahi, meditate. But then the next verse goes on, and 2 verses later it describes Pibata Bhagavata Rasa Alayam. So Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha Rasika. So become Rasikas. Rasikas means those who relish mellows. So become Rasikas and relish the mellow of devotion. And in this way, this is talking about moving from analytical to aesthetic appreciation. So Dhimahi is more of meditation in an analytical mode, how vast is the absolute truth, and Rasika is more in a aesthetic mode. So rasa is possible not in analysis. Rasa is possible, Rasika, as the Bhagavatam says, become a Rasika. Rasa alayam. So Bhagavata is a Rasa alayam. It is a reservoir of rasa. So, in one sense, Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu is an elaboration on the Srimad Bhagavatam. But it's a significant book because there is philosophical books and there are rasic books. Now we use the word rasic books generally to talk about pastimes of Krishna. Those which talk about pastimes of Krishna, which make us laugh, which move us with emotions, we call them as rasic. That is fine, but the word rasic in the Indian tradition has a different meaning. So there is a book called Natya Shastra written by Bharat Muni, and in that he introduces the concept of rasa. So there he describes that in theatre, that means in drama, there are certain things which evoke a specific emotions in the audience. So for example, when a person character laughs or does certain actions, then say hasya rasa, laughter will be invoked in the audience. Or suppose there is fighting and there is beating up, then maybe fear will be invoked. So like that. Now this is a very simple analysis, but in the Natya Shastra has also been commented by various people later. So there what is described is what are the various factors. There is what is discussed in the second part of the Bhakti Samsudhu, Anubhav, Satvika Bhav, all those, Vyabhichari Bhav, all those are said to be factors that contribute to the experience of rasa. So in the Natya Shastra, the idea is that the drama should be performed in such a way on the theatre that that specific rasa is invoked in the audience. And what all are the things need to be done to invoke that rasa, that is what is discussed in the Natya Shastra. So now before Rupa Goswami, at least in the rasa tradition, rasa was considered to be just an emotion that is experienced in the theatre. In the theatre. That means when one sees a particular drama, one experiences emotion. But Rupa Goswami took the concept of rasa from the Rasa Shastra, and then he took the philosophy from the Bhagavatam, the bhakti from the Bhagavatam, and he brought bhakti and rasa together. So bhakti rasa, and when Rupa Goswami explains bhakti rasa, he explains it in such a way that actually this is not something which is experienced occasionally in a theatre on a particular performance. No, it is constantly experienced throughout life. Throughout life, whenever a person is practicing, whenever a person is serving Krishna, the soul and the pure devotee in the spiritual world is serving Krishna, a pure devotee experiences emotions. So rasa is not just is not just limited to a particular, say, a drama in a theatre, but it pervades all actions of life. Now, with respect to these 12 rasas which we just now saw, there are 5 which are primary and there are 7 and the remaining are secondary. What does it mean, primary and secondary? Actually, the 5 primary rasas are also the 5 primary modes of relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. So there is no devotee directly in the Bhayanaka rasa or in the Bhaya rasa. There is a devotee in Dasya, there are devotees Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, and all the devotees who are there, they fall in these 5 rasas, and while falling in these 5 rasas, the next 7 rasas, they add flavor to the relationships. So for example, the Vrajavasis, say the Sakhas, their normal relationship with Krishna will be Sakhyaras. But now when they see Krishna caught in the coils of Kaliya, at that time they may experience an additional bhayanak, ghastliness. What is going to happen now? Is Krishna going to die? Similarly, the normal rasa of Yashoda Mai will be, say, is Vatsalya. But when she sees that Krishna is stealing butter, then within that Vatsalya, an additional rasa may be anger, krodha. So the 7 secondary rasas, they do not form the basis for eternal relationships with devotees. That means there is no devotee who is permanently, eternally in Bhaya rasa or Hasya rasa. Now, for example, Madhumangal, he makes a lot of jokes and he laughs, he causes others to laugh also. So in him, Hasya Rasa is a little bit more. But his primary rasa of relationship is not Hasya. His primary rasa is Sakya. So he's a Sakya rasa and Hasya is embellishment. So like that. So in our Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu study in the Bhakti Shastri course, we will be focusing on the first 19 chapters. So this is an overview of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Now let's move forward. Yesterday we had started discussing the definition of pure devotion as given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So let's look at this definition. Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavrutam anukulyena krishnanu sheelanam bhaktiruttama. So for some cases, situations, I am using Dhanudhara Maharaj's book Way of Devotion to display Sanskrit or to show some diagrams and things like that. So Anyabhilashita Shunyam. We discussed all this once, and now we will focus primarily on understanding Swarupa Lakshana and Tatastha Lakshana. So Swarupa Lakshana, Swarupa means primary characteristic, and Tatastha Lakshana is secondary characteristic. So Swarupa Lakshana and Tatastha Lakshana. So for example, water is liquid. So liquidity is one characteristic. Then we could say pure water, impure water. So water has some defining characteristics, and one of its defining characteristics is liquidity. But within that there can be pure and impure. So like that, the characteristic, the primary Swarupa Lakshana is that bhakti is anukulyena krishnanu is sheelanam. And then anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavrutam. So jnana karmadi anavrutam makes the bhakti jnana karmadi anavrutam makes the bhakti pure. So let's understand this once again. Just show this. So let's come back to this verse. We'll see it here. So now the primary characteristic is focused on this. It is Sheelanam. Sheelanam is, it is action. Anukulyena, it is favorable. Or rather, you could put it Anusheelanam as together. And then Krishna. So let's look at these 3 points. These three comprise the primary characters, Swarupa Lakshana. So what is Swarupa Lakshana? That is, it is for Krishna. So devotion is for Krishna, pure devotion. So in that, now we may say that, oh, can I not have devotion for my nation? Can I have not devotion for my family, for my parents? Yes, we can in a general sense use the word for those things, but in a technical sense, the way Rupa Goswami is defining it over here, devotion is for Krishna. Now, is it exclusivist or limiting? Oh, you should love Krishna only. Can I not love anyone else? Normally, if we love one, like we discussed earlier, if I love my country, then I am not loving other countries. But because Krishna is the root of all existence, when I love Krishna, I love everyone. So, because Krishna is connected with everyone. So, love for Krishna doesn't limit us, it actually pervades everything. We love Krishna, and through Krishna we love everyone. So one of its Swarupa Lakshana is that it is for Krishna only. And then it is actually Sheelanam. Anusheelanam means actually it is activity. It is not some just sentiment. It is not just some conception. So Jiva Goswami in his commentary explains that actually bhakti is a result, bhakti is an expression of the Ladini Shakti of Krishna. Ladini Shakti is Srimati Radharani. And when that Ladini Shakti is bestowed on a devotee, on a seeker, then that seeker blossoms into a proper devotee. Before that also there is some devotion, but it is small level of devotion. So Anusheelanam means that it is not just a conception, it's actions that are done. And Prabhupada explains that the actions can be of two types. There can be pravritti and there is nivritti. That means there are certain actions which should be done because they help in the cultivation of devotion. And there are certain actions which should be given up because those actions will impede the growth of devotion, the development of devotion. And then third character Swarupa Lakshana is Anukulyena. So That means bhakti should be performed with the intention of pleasing Krishna. There's a difference between pleasing Krishna and the intention of pleasing Krishna. Even when the demons fight with Krishna, when they give a good fight, Krishna feels pleased. Yeah, we had a good fight. But their intention was not to please Krishna. So Hiranyakashipu, Kamsa, whenever Krishna fights with them, these kind of demons, at that time, it is not that those demons intend to please Krishna. And therefore, that is not considered bhakti. Anukulyena. So Jiva Goswami gives an interesting example here. He says that when it is already mentioned it is for bhakti is for Krishna, then it is meant for Krishna, then again, why is it need to separately mention Anukulyena? So he gives the example, Prabhupada makes a general statement. He says Krishna includes his paraphernalia. So Krishna is not just Krishna alone. Krishna means he is the complete absolute truth. So everything comes from him, and in one sense Krishna includes everything. At the same time, Krishna is different from everything. Matsthani bhutani. Krishna says Matsthani sarva bhutani 9.4, and then 9.5 in the Bhagavad Gita he says Nache Matsthani bhutani. He says everything situated in me, and he says I am not situated in everything. So there is an inconceivable relationship. So that has to be understood. So he used the example when a king says, let the soldier go to the battlefield. When the soldier is to go to battlefield and is going for war, that means it's understood that the soldier will go with the weapons. Soldier will not go to the battlefield without any weapons, because understood that battlefield means there is likelihood of a war, and one has to be prepared for that. So one would say that when it is said bhakti is for Krishna, then there is no need for any separate statement that it is to be favorable to Krishna. Isn't it implied? So soldier means the weapons are implied with the soldier. So similarly with Krishna, isn't it that the pleasing Krishna is implied? Yeah, so Jiva Goswami says normally it would be implied, but in special cases, if the king gives a command, feed the soldier. So when the soldier is to be fed, that means it is not the soldier's weapons are to be fed. It is the soldier who is to be fed. So in some cases, there may have to be differentiation between soldier and the weapons. So like that, in some cases, there has to be a differentiation between just the activity that pleases Krishna and the activity that is done with the intention of pleasing Krishna. So even the demons' activities may please Krishna, but the demons are not considered devotees because they don't do the activities with the intention of pleasing Krishna. So bhakti is that which is done with the intention of pleasing Krishna. So the three Swarupa Lakshanas are that it is, and so they are actually in the C and D lines. Anukulye Krishna Anushilanam. So Krishna, it is for Krishna. Anushilanam, it involves activity. It is not just a emotion in the heart. It is a cultivation. It is activity. And then it is anukulyena. It is done with the intention of pleasing Krishna. And then the tatastha lakshana. So this is what characterizes bhakti. So as you say, what characterizes water is liquidity. But then we will say if pure water means there other things are not present in the water. So like that, the secondary characteristic, Swarupa Lakshana, the primary characteristic is Swarupa Lakshana, secondary characteristic is called as Tatastha Lakshana. Tatastha Lakshana is that the bhakti should be pure. Pure, so that means Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam, this is what defines bhakti. And what makes the bhakti uttama, it makes it pure, is Anyabhilashita Shunyam Jnana Karma Adyanavritam. So Anyabhilashita Shunyam, that means no other desire. So we discussed about this. Abhilasha is desire, Abhilashita is intention or motive. So a devotee doesn't have any motive other than to serve Krishna or to please Krishna. Although occasionally in emergency some other desires may come up. And Jnana Karma Adyanavritam means that a devotee does not let one's devotion get dominated by Jnana or Karma. Jnana and Karma are both useful and they are both used in bhakti. So there can be bhakti pratikul Jnana and there is going to be bhakti anukul Jnana. Similarly, there can be bhakti anukul karma, bhakti pratikul karma. So the Jnana Karma Adyanavritam means that Jnana and Karma which do not cover bhakti. So the uncovered Jnana and Karma. So for example, a devotee may a devotee can also do philosophical speculation. When the scriptures tell us certain statements, we can contemplate, connect with other scripture statements, connect with what we have heard from different sources, and try to understand what the scripture is saying. So that is perfectly valid, and that is considered to be philosophical speculation. So that is not considered to be jnana which has to be given up. Rather, that is the jnana which takes us closer to Krishna, and that is positive. And in contrast, jnana, karma, adi. Similarly, if one tries to speculate in such a way, one comes to there must be some reality beyond Krishna. Some reality. Oh, maybe Krishna is light. So maybe I have to go beyond that light. Now, maybe Krishna is black. Maybe I have to go beyond the black to the white light. So Brahman is white, and that is real enlightenment. So I have to go like that behind. So when one decides, one does this kind of jnana, speculation, which doesn't take us to Krishna, which takes us away from Krishna, that is pratikul. So that has to be given. Similarly, karma, one can do karma. It is not that we have to give up all activities. It is not that we have to give up all dharmic activities also. The word karma can refer to activity in general. It can also refer to in the types of actions, karma, vikarma, akarma, it can refer to positive actions, sukarma. So is it that we have to give up all karma? No, not necessarily. We can do those activities which are anukul to bhakti. So for example, devotee Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also did Shraddha for his father. So devotees may do some Shraddha ceremonies for their relatives. That sort of karma is not pratikul to bhakti. But if the devotee gets too caught up in that, then that can become a problem. Astrology, for example, that involves karma. So if we start getting into astrology, and then the astrologers tell us that to get rid of this problem, and one should worship wear this for Shani, or do this puja for Mangal, or do this for Guru, do this for Saturn or Mars or Jupiter or whatever, then that will become a contamination in devotional service, because we want to focus on Krishna. So it's not that devotees can't do astrology, but astrology has to be done cautiously. And in the Vaishnava Sampradaya, it is explained how the various grahas, the various planets, are actually controlled ultimately by different manifestations of Supreme Lord. So when Vaishnava astrology, actually rather than worshipping the particular devatas, worship of the particular forms of the Lord who are supervising those devatas, that is recommended. And in that way, one is able to integrate astrology into one's devotion. So for example, instead of worshipping Ganesh worships Narasimhadev. So one can worship Narasimhadev, and that way one can do whatever is recommended in astrology through the worship of Narasimhadev. But if one becomes too caught up in astrology, then one may lose the perspective. So that kind of karma is unfavorable to bhakti. So Srila Prabhupada, for example, now according to, this is just a tentative example, according to some schools in astrology, one should not travel on Thursday. So Srila Harishauri Prabhu writes in his Transcendental Diary that Prabhupada, when he would plan his travels, sometimes he would do it in such a way that he did not travel on Thursday. But then at other times, if a preaching engagement came up, then and it was urgent and it required traveling on Thursday, or some other service came up which required traveling on Thursday, and Prabhupada would do that. So devotees don't necessarily defy the principles of karma, but they don't give up bhakti for the sake of principles of karma. So if the two can be harmonized, well and good, and if the karma can help us in any way in our service to Krishna, then why not? So that's why jnana karmadi anavritam. So these are the tatastha lakshana. So what the tatastha lakshana does is, it makes the devotion pure. So swarupa lakshana and tatastha lakshana. This is how we discuss the definition of bhakti. Now Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu also quotes another definition of bhakti, which also Srila Prabhupada would frequently quote, and that is given by Narad Muni. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tatparatvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. So actually Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu quotes many verses frequently. So as we'll go through the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we will not go through everything that has there. Wherever some explanation is required, we'll discuss that. Otherwise all the references will become quite exhaustive, quite time demanding. So for example, in the introduction there is offering of obeisances to Rupa Goswami offers obeisances to Sanatana Goswami. So I have not to discuss those verses like that. Srila Prabhupada just briefly described them, and in the reading you will be able to go through it. So I'll focus on those sections where the references require some explanation. Now, Sarvopadhi Vinirmuktam. So how does he define bhakti? Tatparatvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam. So bhakti ruchyate. Bhakti ruchyate means this is bhakti. Sarva upadhi nirmuktam. So one gives up all designations. So this is similar to jnana karma adyanavratam. By our jnana and karma, we acquire some upadhi. So for example, I may acquire the upadhi that by my jnana, I may acquire the upadhi I'm a scientist, or I'm an intellectual, I'm a philosopher, I'm an author. By my karma, I may acquire some upadhi. I'm a farmer, I am a housewife, I am an engineer. So of course this is general, not a technical classification, it's just simple examples. So basically through jnana karma we get some different qualifications. So jnana karma adyanavratam sarvopadhi vinirmuktam. So as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told that even in the Varnashram system also, whatever designations are there, a devotee rejects them. He says, Naham Vipro Narapatir Napi Vaishyo na Shudro Naham Varnicha Grahapatir Vanastho Yatirva. So he rejects the four Varnas, identification with the four Varnas and identification with the four ashrams. And he says, I am simply the servant of Krishna. Gopi Bhartur Padakamalayur Dasa Dasa Anudasa. So similar the point is Sarvopadhi Niruktam Tatparatvena Nirmalam. What happens is one becomes Nirmala, and then it is not passive. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam. So Rishika means senses. So we use our senses to serve the Lord of the senses, who is Rishikesh, Sevanam. So when we serve the Lord of the senses with our senses, that is Bhakti Ruchyate. So that is also serving the Lord with the senses also indicated over here by Anushilanam, and Rishikeshu is indicated by Krishna. So the two definitions are parallel, and basically Rupa Goswami is using this Sarvopadhi Vinuktam definition to substantiate what he is saying. Now after this, let us go to the next part of the Bhakti Rasamrita, of the Nectar of Devotion, which is the characteristics of devotional service. So there are 6 characteristics of devotional service, and let us discuss them one by one. Yeah. So what are the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service? Prabhupada explains this. Kleshagni Shubhada Moksha Laguta Krita Sudarlabha Sandranand Visheshatma Sri Krishna Karshini. So Klesha Agni, that means relief from material distress. Klesha is misery, is to extinguish. So extinguishing of misery. We become free from misery by the practice of devotional service. Shubhada. Shubhada means it gives auspiciousness. Shubhada. Da means to give, Shubha is auspiciousness. It gives auspiciousness. We attain auspiciousness by the practice of bhakti. Then Moksha Laguta Krita. Laghu means small, tiny. Krita means to do. Laguta Krita means to make us tiny, to reduce to insignificance. So it makes liberation and the pleasure of liberation reduced to insignificance. So Prabhupada says it derides even the happiness of liberation. And then Sudurlabha. So Labha is obtained, Durlabha is rarely obtained. Sudurlabha is extremely rarely obtained. Sandrananda Visheshatma. So Sandrananda Visheshatma, technically the word Prabhupada it experiences transcendental pleasure. Sandrananda means concentrated. Visheshatma. So very Vishesh. So this is a slightly technical thing. We'll come to it later. Just like nothing can penetrate a metal. So the metal is hard. In it, the atoms are concentrated together. So like that, the bliss of devotion is concentrated together. And then Sri Krishna Karshani. It is the only means to attract Krishna. So let's look at what Srila Prabhupada states over here. So this is what he describes. Now, the way Srila Prabhupada does is that he talks about these 6 characteristics, and then he gives examples. And as I said, this is a summary study. So in the summary study, Srila Prabhupada focuses primarily on giving generic explanations. So Rupa Goswami gives specific examples or specific verses to substantiate specific points, and Prabhupada states them, elaborates them, and in this way Prabhupada through a paraphrase of the Bhakti-Samamrita Sindhu explains it to him. So what is this relief from material distress? Actually, everyone is trying to get relief from distress. So for example, when we have sickness, we go to a doctor, and we go to that for, doctor, I'm having pain, please give me some medicine. So that medicine is supposed to give us relief from distress. Now, in a particular sickness, a particular place, if the disease is diagnosed properly, then the medicine will work. But that sort of relief is temporary. So what bhakti offers us is permanent relief. It offers us permanent relief, complete relief. So that is Klesha Agni. Now, we have discussed in the course earlier how there are 9 stages of bhakti. So there is Shraddha, then there is Sadhu Sangha, then there is Bhajana Kriya, then there is Anartha Nivritti, then there is Nishtha, Ruchi, Bhav, Asakti and Prema. The 9 stages. So we come to the association of devotees with faith. With little faith, we come to the association of devotees, Sadhu Sangha. Then we do Bhajana Kriya, start chanting Hare Krishna, practicing devotion. Then there is Anartha Nivritti. Then the Anarthas start going away. Lust, anger, greed, they start going away. And then there is Nishtha. At that time, there is strong faith. So at the stage of Shraddha, the faith is a bit tender, like say a banana tree. But at the stage of Nishtha, the faith is strong, unshakable, like a banyan tree. So at the stage of Nishtha, when the faith has become very strong, this characteristic develops. So now when we say these are the characteristics of devotional service, they are not necessarily manifest immediately. We are sadhakas. Sadhakas means that we are not yet developed bhakti. We are going along the path of bhakti. So we may not experience these effects immediately. To some extent, we may experience a little bit glimpse. For example, when our mind is filled with great anxiety, and we start chanting Hare Krishna at that time, and then just as we get absorbed in Krishna, then we feel relief from the anxiety. The tension goes away and we feel calm. So that is an example of some kind of Klesha Agni. But that is only a preliminary. There is just a glimpse. But actually, we will experience much greater relief as we move forward in our spiritual life. So once we come to the level of Nishtha, then we start experiencing Klesha Agni. So now, Rupa Goswami goes into elaborate analysis of what causes Klesha. Now, I may say that, okay, I'm in a particular place and the atmosphere is very hot over here. So what is causing Klesha is the heat. So if I just have an air conditioner, the Klesha will go away. Well, that is a very superficial analysis. That is true in one sense, but what put me in a place where there's too much heat? Why is the atmosphere so hot over there? So ultimately these things happen because of our own past karma. So he explains how technically how miseries originate. So let's look at this here. So here the diacritics is not displaying properly, so we will not be able to, this A becomes a little distorted. But avidya, root problem is ignorance, and then avidya leads to bijam. This is general definition. I'll discuss technically more about this later. Then material desires, and then this is bijam actually, and then there is papam. Papam is sinful act, and sinful act leads to suffering. So let's understand this simply once again with a simple example. Say a child is ignorant. Child does not know that fire is bad. So what a child does is, child doesn't, with ignorance the child starts, I don't know fire is bad, and then he says, oh, this fire is shining so much, it looks so nice. Child gets a desire, let me go and touch the fire. And then the child actually goes and touches the fire and the hand starts burning. So this is a simple example of how this 4 stages happen. Ignorance leads to a wrong desire. Wrong desire leads to to an unwarranted action, to a wrong action, and then that leads to suffering. So avidya Kunti Maharani also talks about this in her prayers. Bhavesmin klishyamananam avidya kama karma bhi shravana smaranarhani karishaniti kechana. So she describes when she's analyzing the various reasons why Krishna appears in 1.8.32 to 35. She concludes that analysis by describing how you appear, my dear Lord, to free the conditioned soul from suffering by teaching them the process of hearing and chanting. So there she describes Bhavesmin klishyamananam. So klesha is there. What is the cause of klesha? She says first is avidya. Avidya leads to kama. Kama is material desires. And then kama leads to karma. And karma will lead to karma phala, which is klesha. So this is how avidya, kama, karma and klesha. That's how it happens. So now if you want to remove klesha, what all has to be done? There is first of all there is multiple levels of removing that will be required. So we are doing some bad karma that will give reactions. So what has to be done is whatever bad karma that we are doing, that we have to stop doing bad karma. Then we will not get the reactions. But then we already done some bad karma. That will also give some reactions. So that also has to be dealt with. And then there are some wrong desires which we have. So we have to give up those desires also. And then after that, the basic ignorance because of which we got those wrong desires, we have to give them up also. Or example would be, say a person is alcoholic. So then, if the alcoholic has to become free from suffering, then right now, say the alcoholic, let's look at this with a further example. I'll explain this further. Take this example of alcoholic. So now papam is sinful action. Sinful action gives two kinds of reactions, aprarabdha and prarabdha. Aprarabdha is unmanifest reaction. Prarabdha is the manifest reaction. So what is the meaning of manifest and unmanifest? Say, a simple example, this may not be entirely technically accurate, but when an alcoholic has drunk heavily, then by that, now there's a hangover, there is a headache, and maybe the person has lost the money, person has fallen in a dirty place or whatever. So this is the reaction which has come about. But that is what is visible right now. But along with that, the drinking of the alcohol may internally have started spoiling the liver. And that may eventually lead to a disease in the body. So that is stored, that has not yet come out. It will come out eventually. So like that, our karma, it's not exactly like that, but it's a general example to illustrate that there can be reactions consequences that we are experiencing and consequences we are not experiencing. So there is prarabdha karma, which is what we are actually experiencing right now, and aprarabdha karma is that which we are not experiencing. So if you can envision, say, our karmic bank account like a water tank. So if there is a water tank, like in a water tank, say water is coming in from above and water is going out from below. So water that is going out from below, that is falling. So that means, now so if that is our karmic water tank, we could say, then whatever karma we are doing right now, that is adding water to the karmic water tank. And whatever water is coming out, that means that those are consequences that we are bearing right now. So now in the water, there is further water also. In the water tank, there is further water which is not yet come out. So some water has come out and there is much water that is still remaining, which is going to come out later in due course. So suppose there is a big water tank and there is only a small hole below. Then out of the water tank, small amount of water will come out. So like that, prarabdha karma refers to what we are experiencing right now. So for example, I may have a particular body which may be a little sickly, or I may be born in a not so wealthy family. I may be born in a place where there's a lot of violence and insecurity and terrorism, and or I may be born in a place where there are natural calamities happening constantly, earthquake prone area or cyclone prone area, and other people may be born in relatively peaceful areas. So why this difference? That is prarabdha karma. That is something which is because of my past karma. This is something which I'm experiencing right now. So, but there is also more that I'm not experienced. So, aprarabdha is what is going to come to me in the future. Now, there are some technical words for this, which I'll just briefly mention. So, the total water tank that is there, that is like the sanchit karma. Sanchit is accumulated karma. And out of that accumulated karma, some of it is coming out. So that is the prarabdha karma that is coming out. And what is not coming out, what is still in the tank, that is the aprarabdha. And now in this sanchit karma, accumulated karma, there is something which is coming in. That which is coming in is called as kriyaman. Kriyaman means what I am doing right now. So what I am doing is adding to my karmic bank account, and what I am enduring is now exhausting my karmic bank account. So how does bhakti remove these sufferings? Let us understand this now. So that means, what are all the causes of sufferings? Our past wrong actions, which are bringing some reactions now, or which will bring some reaction in the future. Our wrong desires, which will impel us to wrong actions, which will cause suffering. And our basic ignorance, which also causes suffering. So actually bhakti removes all these causes of suffering over a period of time. How does that work out? So firstly, let's look at avidya. Now what happens is, by the practice of bhakti yoga, as Krishna tells in the Bhagavad Gita, dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te dadami buddhi yogam tam. You come, I give you the intelligence by which you come to me. So Krishna also says this in 10.10 and 10.11. He says that Jnana Deepena Bhasvataha, I give knowledge. So a devotee becomes illumined by knowledge from within, by which the devotee becomes freed from the ignorance which impels one to wrong actions, which makes one vulnerable to wrong desires, which impel one to wrong action. So avidya is the foundation, and that becomes removed. Because as we practice devotional service more and more, it becomes clear to us, okay, this is desirable, this is undesirable. Because I am a soul at the bodily level, enjoying things is not going to make me happy. Why should I get so much into these things? So in this way, one becomes purified. That is how one becomes, the avidya is removed. Now what about the wrong desires, the karma that is there? That karma can be at different levels. And then there is actually bhakti purifies us. It purifies us means there is a general example given in the scriptures that just as fire, just if there is wood accumulated in a place and then fire is set, the whole wood will get burnt. So similarly, Prabhupada quotes a Shastric reference over here. So similarly, all the karmic reactions are burned by the fire of devotion. So that is the general principle. How does it happen specifically? Kama, we have material desires. Bhakti purifies us of those material desires. It redirects our desires from the material level to the spiritual level. So therefore, what happens is that karma becomes spiritualized. So there is Narottam Das Thakur sang a song in which he says that Kama Krishna Karma Arpane. He tells how all the anarthas can be purified and how all of them can be redirected towards Krishna. So Kama goes towards Krishna. So devotee starts desiring Krishna and desiring to serve Krishna and desiring to offer everything to Krishna. So instead of desiring things for our sense gratification, we desire things for Krishna's pleasure. That is, Kama becomes spiritualized. Then after that, let's move forward. Now, prarabdha karma. So Prabhupada quotes the example of Devahuti over here. So here, what prarabdha karma means? Let's come back over. What is Devahuti's example? He says that Savanaya kalpate. Savanaya kalpate means they become qualified to do sacrifices. Who? Ahobat shopachoto gariyan. So there are two different verses in different contexts. Both of them emphasize the elevating potency of bhakti. And Prabhupada quotes them also, quote those verses here. So the point is that normally people who are born as mlechas, chandalas, because of their sinful body, traditionally they are not considered qualified to do fire sacrifices because their body is considered contaminated and sinful. But if one becomes a devotee, then what happens is, it says that one becomes purified. And Shravanam Smaranam. So if one remembers Krishna, one takes darshan of Krishna, one serves Krishna, then one savanaya kalpate. One becomes qualified to even do fire sacrifice. This is an example of how the prarabdha karma goes off. So traditionally, not everybody is qualified for these kind of karmas, but bhakti makes them qualified. Bhakti makes one qualified. And then one's birth, the way we are born is a result of our past karma, but that effect of the birth was countered by the process of bhakti. And Krishna also talks about this in 9.33 when he says, Ye pisyo papa yonaya tepi yanti param gatim. He says, he gives examples of Striyo, Vaishyas, Tha, Shudras. These are generally considered lower births. But Krishna says that if mam hi partha vyapashrite, if they take shelter of me, then tepi yanti param gatim. They can also attain the supreme destination. So this prarabdha karma result is removed by Krishna. Now what about aprarabdha karma? Let's look at aprarabdha karma. We'll come back to prarabdha karma a little bit later once again. So here there are different ways of analyzing this, and we will not go into all of these. We'll just focus on one way of analyzing it. So now papam, sinful action, it has two reactions. One is the unmanifest reaction, aprarabdha 1 and aprarabdha 2, we could say. What is the unmanifest reaction? That unmanifest reaction will lead to direct suffering, physical, emotional suffering. And indirect suffering will be by, it is kutam. We'll discuss what is kutam, is the sinful proclivity. Increased sinful proclivity. So let's understand this. So when an alcoholic drinks alcohol, when a person drinks alcohol, so at that time what happens? That is going to lead to some, initially there might be some pleasure, but that is going to lead to some reaction. What is that reaction? It is going to lead to, say, a hangover or vomiting or some pain in the stomach, or it may lead to some disease also. So that is the reaction that comes at a physical level. But along with that, what also happens is that alcoholic becomes attracted to alcohol. There's addiction results. When a person drinks once, twice, thrice, 4 times, when we engage in when indulge in sense gratification, what happens is that between the senses and the sense objects, a rope is formed. And with every indulgence, that rope becomes stronger and tighter. It actually becomes stronger and tighter. That means it allows us lesser and lesser leeway. And then it becomes more and more difficult. That's how people become addicted. Once it drinks, then the second time the temptation comes again. But if a person is drunk 10 times, then the temptation comes much stronger. If a person is drunk 100 times, then the temptation almost becomes like a default thinking only. That's what person thinks of automatically. So that's how we become addicted. So that sinful proclivity, kutam, is also a consequence of sinful action. So sinful action leads to both consequences. It leads to sinful desire and suffering. So now both are removed. How is suffering removed? We just discussed that at one level. Now the aprarabdha phala, when it becomes prarabdha, some of it, that becomes removed by the process of bhakti, and when aprarabdha eventually becomes kuta, then the kuta becomes bija. What is that bija? Let's understand this. So there is, so let's try to understand this here. When we do papa, when we do sinful action, that leads to aprarabdha, the unmanifest reactions. Now the unmanifest reactions affect us in 2 ways. One is prarabdha, we get a manifest reaction. Another is that there is kutam. Kutam means I get a sinful inclination. And a sinful inclination leads to sinful desire, bijam. And then from the sinful desire, because of sinful desire, I again engage in sinful action, and that leads papam. So let's understand this sinful inclination and sinful desire, kutam and bijam. What is the difference between the two? And actually all this terminology comes from a verse from the Puranas. Aprarabdha phalam papam kutam bijam phalonmukham kramenaiva praliyeta Vishnu bhaktiratatmana. So Vishnu bhaktiratatmana. When one becomes rata, absorbed in Vishnu bhakti, then what happens? Aprarabdha phalam papam kutam bijam phalonmukham. So aprarabdha and the kuta, bija and phalonmukha, everything gets removed by the process of, by the power of bhakti. That's what this verse is talking about. And that is what we are elaborating on over here. Now, what does Bhakti works at multiple levels. Kuta and Bija, inclination and desire. That means, say, when a person when a young student goes to college, at that time the student may have a daredevilish propensity. I want to smoke, I want to drink, and I want to see what is all these things. Now that is just a proclivity, but then the student goes and gets to stay in a particular room, and in that room, say the room partners are smokers or drunkards, or somebody is working in a company and somebody has come from a cultured, relatively pure background, and then one goes into a company where the idea of being trendy and modern means that one has to engage in all sorts of these sort of sinful activities. Then what happens is, there when one is in that association, that kuta becomes bija, that proclivity becomes a specific desire. Proclivity means an inclination, a tendency. The tendency grows and becomes a specific desire. When it becomes a specific desire, actually the strength also becomes stronger, and then it is much more difficult to counter that, but still it is possible to counter it. So what the process of bhakti does is, it removes the kuta as well as the bija. So bija and kuta. So now Srila Prabhupada gives example over here of bija. That Ajamil externally was engaged in pure activities. He was a Brahmin and he was engaged in Brahminical activities. But internally, the aprarabdha was there. What was that? There were bij, there was a sinful desire. And what happened was, when he saw the Shudra and the Shudrani embracing, that triggered the desire. And when the desire got triggered, then he engaged in sinful activities. But then the whole purpose of telling this pastime of Ajamil in the 6th canto is to demonstrate how eventually when he chanted the name of Narayan, then what happened? That freed him from sinful reactions. And what does it mean, freedom from sinful reactions? Actually, it awakened him. He chanted Narayan, the Vishnudas came, he became awakened. How Ajamil got delivered is an elaborate subject. I won't go into that specifically here, into technicalities here. But basically, after that, after this whole incident, what happened to Ajamil? He reformed himself, and then he left his sinful life. He went and started doing austerities, and this incident first happened at the age of 88. Then he did austerities for 12 years, and then eventually he became liberated. Again, the same Vishnudas came and took him back to Godhead. So what happened was, the sinful desires which had led him to the sinful actions. So what happened was, by the process of bhakti, the sinful desires were removed. His actions also stopped, and his sinful desires also stopped. So now kutam bijam. So bija means there are certain temptations which we know which we are inclined to right now. But once we start practicing bhakti, we get a higher taste, and those temptations don't appear so strong, so alluring, and we become free from them. And we may not even know. We may have certain inclinations within our heart which will manifest at a particular time. It's like a child, because the body is not suited. So in a child, lust doesn't awaken. But when the child attains puberty, then lust awakens in the child. So what does it indicate? Is it that the child is innocent? We could say at one level the child is innocent. Yes, but at another level, within the heart there is sinful propensity, and proclivity is there. And when the appropriate bodily environment comes up, then that lust manifests. So like that, we may think that, okay, I am not very sinful, but who knows, there might be some sinful propensities that are there in our heart, and then when the opportunity comes, then suddenly that desires start coming up. So for example, I may think I am a very gentle, humble, sweet, sensitive person, but suppose I am put in a position of authority, where I can crush others. Then suddenly when I have that temptation, if anybody opposes me, I just stamp that person out of existence. Not literally, figuratively. And suddenly when I get power, and sometimes there are some people who appear very gentle and soft, but once they come to power, it's as if they have changed something on it differently. They suddenly become so dominant. So what has happened? That means the sinful proclivity was there earlier, and now, of course, some people may deliberately conceal a sinful proclivity so that they can get power, but others, it may happen that they themselves did not know that they had a sinful proclivity. But once the temptation came, then the sinful proclivity manifested and it expressed itself very strongly. So what bhakti does, it removes the sinful proclivity also. So it burns it away. So we don't even come to know about it, it just gets burned away. That is the power of bhakti. Now, what bhakti does is, it burns away our sufferings in different ways. So we discussed how bhakti removes avidya, because it gives us knowledge of right and wrong. Then how does it remove kama? We discussed this kama, these wrong desires, they are purified because bhakti uses pure desires, and discuss with kuta and bija. So the desires that we know, the desires that we don't know, they will all get purged out. So bhakti fills us with spiritual desires. Once we start getting a taste in bhakti, then we want to serve Krishna more and more. And the more we want to serve Krishna, and the more we become freed from our wrong desires. That's how actually in bhakti, it's not that we so much suppress the desires, rather we crowd the desires out. Bhakti is not so much a process of emptying the mind of wrong desires, it is a process of filling the mind with right desires. Yadpad pankaj palasha vilasa bhaktya karmashayan gratitam udgratayanti santa. So it's long verse, I won't go into that right now. Yadpad pankaj palasha vilasa bhaktya. The devotees, they do vilasa in the lotus feet of the Lord. They delight in serving the Lord, and thereby what happens? Karmashayan, strong desires that are there, they are like waves coming in ocean. They keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. But once a devotee gets spiritual desires, then those desires go away. And this doesn't happen for those tadvanna rikta matayo yatayono, those who try to do yukta matayo, those who try to empty the mind. The jnanis say, no, I won't get into this, I won't get into this, I don't get into this. The rikta matayo, they try to empty the mind. It doesn't work for them. But for a bhajava sudevam, worship Lord Hari. Because bhakti, nature abhors a vacuum. So if we try to empty the mind, it will not work. But when we fill the mind with Krishna, then automatically Maya goes out of the mind. So like that, what bhakti does is, it removes the misery in this way. It removes the avidya, it removes the kama, and it removes the karma. That means it stops us from doing sinful activities. Now, we may say that if bhakti is kleshagni, then how exactly does this work out? That means, devotees still have suffering. As sadhakas we suffer, and sometimes we see advanced devotees also suffer. So how do we understand this? And now it is said that at the stage of nishtha, one becomes free from klesha, one experiences kleshagni. Then there are devotees who are above nishtha, who may be in bhava and prema, and even they suffer. So actually, their suffering is completely different, of a different nature. Prabhupada would give the example of how when a woman gets married and comes to a household, she is the daughter-in-law over there, and the daughter-in-law is to be told how to serve, how to act in the house, and she may not know what is the culture in that house. So when she does something wrong, the mother, she doesn't chastise the daughter-in-law directly. She chastises her daughter. She says, don't you know? You should put this first and then put this afterwards and put this afterwards. Now the daughter already knows it. But if she chastises the daughter-in-law may feel shaken by that. I just come new and everybody is scolding me over here. So mother tells the daughter, and by telling the daughter-in-law gets instructed. Sorry, by telling the daughter, mother tells the daughter, and by the daughter-in-law say, this is to be done like this, I'll do it, take care of it. So like that, sometimes Krishna arranges, so for Krishna is like the mother, and the devotees are like the daughter. And the new upcoming devotees are like the daughter-in-law. So what Krishna does is, he sometimes let his devotees suffer, and those sufferings are for what purpose? They are not the karmic reactions of those devotees. The daughter has not done anything wrong. Daughter knows how to serve. But that is done so that the daughter-in-law can learn. Similarly, sometimes devotees undergo some suffering so that others can learn. Now, does this mean that Krishna just causes suffering to those devotees when they have not done anything wrong? No, actually there is suffering which purifies, suffering which glorifies. So Srila Prabhupada, he had to face so many difficulties in sharing Krishna consciousness with the world. He was penniless, he was practically friendless when he went to America, and then he was Without, he would practically, also had 2 heart attacks, and we see that often he had severe health problems. So this was not a karmic reaction. Through this, Srila Prabhu Krishna demonstrates how a devotee is Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantasya drudhavrataha. In 9.41, Krishna says that a devotee always glorifies me with determination. So Srila Prabhupada's determined devotional service, even amidst Herculean obstacles, that is meant to instruct us that whatever obstacles we have, we just tolerate those obstacles and we move forward in our devotional service. Our obstacles are nothing as compared to the obstacles that Srila Prabhupada dealt with. So that is for instructing us. And so those are actually, they, by seeing Prabhupada's example, what happens is Prabhupada gets glorified. And if there were no obstacles, then we think, oh yes, Krishna arranged everything, Prabhupada is a pure devotee, everything worked out. But it was not like that. Prabhupada had to face difficulties, and his determination was that even amidst difficulties he went away. So a devotee's suffering is meant to glorify that devotee. For us, when the suffering comes up, it is to purify us, and for advanced devotees, to glorify them. Further, if we move forward, there is also the understanding that for a devotee, suffering doesn't just come by the law of karma. A devotee, Krishna takes care of the karma. And when a devotee gets any suffering, that is not any karmic reaction, that is Krishna's arrangement. It's not that Krishna is causing that suffering, but Krishna takes the karma of the devotee and arranges for the karmic reaction to come in such a way that one, it will be anukul to bhakti. Krishna can remove all suffering in one moment. But once the suffering is removed, then what may happen is that the devotee thinks, oh, this world is a happy place. I will be happy, Krishna, you be happy there, I'll be happy here. And a person may give up bhakti also. So what happens is, Krishna does whatever is anukul for the devotee. So for the anukul for the growth of the devotee. So a devotee may be allowed to have suffering sometimes, because through that suffering one grows in one's devotion. How does one grow? That happens when we take shelter of Krishna. Without taking shelter of Krishna, we cannot understand how we are growing through our suffering. So for a devotee, suffering brings realization. Yes, this world is a place of misery, and I have to grow beyond this world. So the important point is that for a devotee, suffering is removed, and when a devotee afterwards seems to get suffering, that is actually not karmic reaction, that is arrangement of the Lord. It may be involved taking the karma and adjusting it in such a way that the devotee moves forward closer towards Krishna. So Klesha Agni, as sadhakas, we shouldn't demand that Krishna, now I have become a devotee, it is said that bhakti means Klesha Agni, so I should get Klesha Agni, I should become free from suffering. A devotee doesn't demand that. What a devotee asks for is, my dear Lord, let me be absorbed in you, let me remember you always. And if you can remember Krishna, that remembrance itself will enable us to transcend suffering. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what does he pray? He says, Mama Janmani Janmanishware Bhavatad Bhakti Rahetu Kitai. He says, even if I have to take birth again, now why would one have to take birth again? Mama Janmani Janmani. Generally, if our karma is exhausted, then we will not have to take birth again. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not demanding that let my karma get exhausted. He says, even if my karma remains and even if I have to take birth again, what I want is Bhavatad Bhakti Rahetu Kitai. Let me have unmotivated devotion to you, and let me be absorbed in you thereby. And if we are absorbed in Krishna, then even in this world we will be able to transcend misery. And eventually, of course, we are absorbed in Krishna, then we will go back to Krishna. That will happen in the long run. But in the intermediate stage, the more we can be absorbed in Krishna, the more we can, even in this world, tolerate and transcend misery. And over a period of time, we will also experience this Klesha Agni more and more. We'll experience how the process of bhakti frees us from misery. The remaining characteristics of pure devotional service we will discuss in our next class. Thank you. Hare Krishna.